My daughter's war hero fiancé stole our $250,000 life savings. But his military records revealed something shocking. You know that feeling when you're watching a magic show and you spot the wire? That tiny glint of metal that ruins the whole illusion? That was me, sitting at my own dinner table on what should have been a perfect October evening, watching my future son-in-law perform his greatest trick yet, making my family believe he was a war hero. The smell of Ellen's herb-crusted turkey filled our dining room. 23 years of marriage, and she still cooked like she was auditioning for the Food Network. Our daughter Sarah sat next to Mark, her eyes never leaving his face as he told his story. Another story. Always a story with this guy. This one was about Kandahar. Or maybe it was Helmand Province. The location seemed to shift depending on his audience. Mark's hands moved through the air like a conductor at the symphony, painting pictures of heroism that belonged in a Hollywood screenplay. RPGs whistling overhead. Taliban fighters closing in. His squad pinned down in some compound that sounded suspiciously like the set from Black Hawk Down. Then came the money shot, the part where he dragged his wounded buddy, always Martinez, never first name, 200 yards under fire. His voice dropped to that perfect dramatic whisper when he said he couldn't leave him behind. No man left behind. Where had I heard that before? Oh, right. Every war movie ever made. Ellen had tears in her eyes. Actual tears. My wife, who'd lived through 23 years of my nightmares, my 3 a.m. wanderings, my long silences, was crying over this kid's performance. Sarah gripped Mark's hand like he might disappear, like the Taliban might burst through our suburban dining room window and snatch him away. The thing is, real war stories don't sound like that. They're choppy, confused, full of gaps because your brain doesn't record trauma in neat narrative packages. You remember weird stuff, the way dust tasted, how your buddy's laugh sounded wrong after he saw his first body, the smell of diesel fuel mixed with cordite. Mark's stories were Netflix ready. Beginning, middle, end. Character arcs. Dramatic pauses. In his version of Afghanistan, every mission was a clear moral victory. Every enemy wore a black turban, and every American soldier came home with their honor intact. He was mid-gesture, describing the weight of Martinez on his shoulders. When he said it, the thing that made my BS detector go from humming to screaming. The adrenaline hit different that day, you know? Best high of my life. I set down my fork real careful-like. Ellen shot me a look. She knew my tells after all these years. But I just reached for my beer, took a slow sip, and let Mark continue his show. High. He called combat adrenaline a high, like it was some kind of extreme sport, like watching your buddy's legs turn into hamburger was somehow thrilling, like war was a video game with respawns and achievement badges. Any real combat vet will tell you, adrenaline in a firefight doesn't feel like a high. It feels like someone injected battery acid into your veins. Your insides turn to ice while your skin burns. You don't feel like Superman. You feel like a rabbit that just spotted a wolf, except you're a rabbit with an M4 and the wolf has an RPG. I watched his hands while he talked. Soft, manicured, not a single callus or scar. These were hands that had never dug a fighting position in frozen ground, never held pressure on a sucking chest wound, never had to wipe their best friend's blood off their face. But my family didn't see that. They saw what they wanted to see, what they needed to see. Sarah needed her hero. Ellen needed to believe our daughter had found someone better than her old man, someone who could talk about his feelings instead of hiding in the garage rebuilding carburetors. The stories kept flowing. Mark had an endless supply. The time he saved an Afghan kid from a minefield. The time he held a position solo for 6 hours. The time he turned down a Silver Star because he was just doing his job. Humble brag after humble brag, each one more polished than the last. My old sergeant used to say the only hero in war is the guy who makes it home alive to drink a cold beer. The rest is just Hollywood nonsense. But try explaining that to people who've been raised on Saving Private Ryan and American Sniper. After dinner, Ellen brought out her famous pecan pie. Mark had to tell us how it reminded him of his grandmother's recipe, how she'd baked one just like it before his deployment. how that pie kept him going through the tough times overseas. The man never met a cliché he didn't want to marry. I wanted to ask him which deployment. First? Second? What unit was he with again? Basic questions that any real vet could answer in their sleep. But Ellen's hand on my arm stopped me. That gentle pressure that meant, behave yourself. Then it happened. Right there, between the pie and coffee, Mark stood up, reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box. Time did that thing where it slows down and speeds up simultaneously. He dropped to one knee, right there next to Ellen's china cabinet. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. Ellen grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. The speech was perfect. Of course it was. Something about finding his anchor in a storm, his light in darkness. How Sarah had saved him from the nightmares of war. How he wanted to spend his life making her as happy as she'd made him. The ring was vintage, Art Deco, probably cost 3 months of salary. Sarah said yes before he even finished asking. They kissed. We applauded. Ellen cried. The perfect American moment. Mark shook my hand afterward, called me Dad for the first time, said he'd take care of her, protect her, love her the way she deserved. All the right words in all the right order. I managed to smile, even patted him on the back, played the part of the proud father while that wire kept glinting in my peripheral vision. What was I supposed to do? Tell my daughter I had a bad feeling? Ruin the happiest moment of her life because something in my gut said this guy was performing rather than living? That's not how families work. You swallow your doubts and hope you're wrong. After they left, Sarah floating on cloud 9, already talking wedding dates, I found myself at the kitchen sink. Ellen always said the dishwasher worked fine, but I needed something to do with my hands. Needed the ritual of soap and water, the simple clarity of dirty becoming clean. That's when Ellen came up behind me, put her hand on my shoulder. Her touch was gentle, but her words cut deep. She told me how wonderful Mark was, how open, how willing to share his pain, his experiences. She said Sarah would finally have a man who wasn't afraid to talk, wasn't locked inside himself like some kind of fortress, a man people could be proud of. The subtext hung between us like smoke. Mark was everything I wasn't, everything I'd failed to be for 23 years. She said maybe Mark could help me. Maybe having another veteran in the family would help me open up, help me finally talk about Vietnam, share my stories like Mark shared his. I kept washing the same plate, around and around, watching my reflection ripple in the dark window above the sink. The man looking back at me was gray, tired, silent. Ellen squeezed my shoulder, mistaking my silence for emotion about the engagement, so we'd finally have a complete family. Then she kissed my cheek and went upstairs, leaving me alone with the dishes and her words. I stood there for another hour, hands in soapy water, staring at that reflection, gripping the sponge so hard my knuckles went white, like I was trying to squeeze out 40 years of silence. The water ran to my fingers, warm, then cold, then warm again. Outside, October was turning into November. The leaves on our oak looked like dried blood in the porch light. I wanted to tell Ellen everything. Why I really spent hours in the garage. About the faces that still visited at 3 a.m. About Henderson's blood that I could still feel on my hands some mornings. About the village we weren't supposed to talk about. But I just kept washing that plate. Because that's what I'd done for 23 years. Kept quiet. Kept the war locked in its box. Kept my family safe from the things that had followed me home. Now here was Mark, turning his fictional war into social currency, spending it at dinner parties and job interviews, getting praise for his openness while I got criticized for my silence. The joke was on them, though. Real war doesn't make you chatty. It makes you careful with words because you've seen what happens when words fail, when all you've got left is screaming and gunfire and the taste of copper in your mouth. I finally let the water drain, watched it spiral down like it was taking something important with it. Dried my hands on Ellen's decorative towel, the one with embroidered roosters from some craft fair. Through the window, I could see the neighbor's TV flickering blue and white. Somewhere a dog barked. Normal suburban sounds. The sounds of peace. But I knew better. Peace is just a pause between wars. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the darkness. The enemy was already inside our wire, already family, already planning his next move. And I was standing in my kitchen, paralyzed by my reputation as the damaged goods from a war nobody wanted to remember. I gripped that sponge one more time, then set it down. Tomorrow I'd go to the garage, work on the Mustang, try to forget the feeling in my gut that told me Mark Peterson was going to destroy everything we'd built. The hardest battles aren't fought in jungles. They're fought in kitchens where your wife's disappointment weighs more than a full combat pack. Welcome to my war. Population 1. 3 weeks after the engagement, Mark called a family meeting. That should have been my first red flag. In 23 years of marriage, we'd never had a family meeting. We had arguments over breakfast, discussions during commercials, and the occasional shouting match in the driveway. But meetings? That was corporate speak. That was sales talk. He showed up with a briefcase. An actual leather briefcase, like he was some Wall Street hotshot, instead of a mid-level tech guy. Sarah glowed next to him, playing with her engagement ring the way she used to play with her hair when she was nervous. Ellen had set out the good china and coffee. The staging was perfect. Mark cleared his throat like he was about to address Congress. Then he pulled out a folder, laid it on our coffee table with the reverence of a priest handling scripture. The cover read Veterans Estates, a mission of honor. I almost laughed. Almost. The pitch was smooth as aged whiskey. He wasn't asking for money, he explained. He was offering us an opportunity to be part of something bigger, something that mattered. A residential community for combat veterans, built by veterans, funded by people who understood sacrifice. He had mock-ups, professional ones, pictures of smiling vets in wheelchairs playing basketball, families barbecuing on perfect lawns, a memorial garden with every brick bearing a fallen soldier's name. It was emotional manipulation dressed up as patriotism, and it was working. Ellen's eyes were misty. Sarah gripped Mark's hand like he'd just cured cancer. And there I was, the only one seeing the strings attached to this puppet show. The numbers came next. $250,000 initial investment. My stomach dropped to the floor and kept going. That was our retirement, our safety net. Everything we'd saved since I came back from the jungle and promised myself I'd never be broke again. Mark must have seen my face because he quickly added that we'd be partners, not just investors. 20% returns within 2 years. Guaranteed. That word should have set off air raid sirens. Nothing in life is guaranteed except death and taxes, and even those you can sometimes dodge if you're creative enough. Then came the masterstroke, the move that proved this kid was either a genius or had done this before. He said we needed to protect our assets, keep things clean for tax purposes, set up a trust account specifically for the project, separate from our other finances. Smart business, he called it. And here's where it got interesting. He suggested Ellen should be the primary trustee. Not me, not both of us. Ellen, because she had the better credit score, he said, because it would show his faith in the family he was joining, because it would make her a real partner, not just the investor's wife. I watched Ellen's face transform. Suddenly, she wasn't just a woman who'd stood behind her silent, damaged husband for 2 decades. She was a business partner, a decision maker, someone important. The documents appeared like magic, already prepared, already notarized, just needed signatures. Mark had thought of everything, even bringing his own pen. A Mont Blanc, I noticed, the kind that cost more than most people's car payments. I tried to be diplomatic, asked about market research, building permits, contractor bids. Basic questions anyone with half a brain would ask before dropping $250,000 on anything. Mark had answers for everything. Smooth, rehearsed answers that sounded good, but said nothing, like explaining how to build a plane while you're already flying it. Ellen signed first. Her signature looked confident, proud, like she was signing the Declaration of Independence instead of what might be our financial death warrant. Sarah hugged her, told her how brave she was, how proud she was to have a mother who understood vision. Vision, that's what they called it when I hesitated. When I suggested, maybe we should have a lawyer look things over. When I mentioned that successful businesses usually didn't need to raid their founders' retirement accounts, that's when Sarah exploded. 24 years of frustration came out in one volcanic eruption. Said I'd spent her whole childhood hiding in that garage, rebuilding engines instead of building memories. Said Mark was actually doing something, helping people, making a difference. Said I couldn't stand that someone was finally showing me what a real man looked like. A real man. My daughter, who I'd carried on my shoulders through every 4th of July parade, who I'd taught to change oil and throw a curveball, who I'd walked to school every morning for 6 years because she was scared of the neighbor's dog. She thought Mark was more of a man than me. Ellen didn't explode. She did something worse. She got quiet. After Sarah stormed off to comfort Mark, who developed a convenient headache, Ellen and I were alone in our living room. The same room where we'd brought Sarah home from the hospital, where we'd hosted her birthday parties, where I'd tried and failed 1,000 times to be the husband she deserved. She said she'd waited 23 years for me to let her in, to tell her about Vietnam, to share the pain I carried like shrapnel in my chest. But I'd chosen silence, chosen the garage, chosen my precious cars over my family. Then she said the words that cut deeper than any VC bayonet ever could. Maybe I didn't talk because there was nothing to talk about. Maybe I'd been a clerk, pushing papers while real soldiers like Mark did the fighting. Maybe my silence wasn't trauma, but shame. I wanted to tell her about Firebase Alpha, about the night we got overrun, and I held the perimeter with 2 other guys for 6 hours until relief arrived, about the smell of napalm in the morning. Nothing like victory, more like burned meat and failure, about finding Henderson in pieces and having to identify him by his wedding ring. But the words wouldn't come. They never did. They stayed locked in that box in my chest, the one that had been welded shut somewhere between Saigon and San Francisco. Ellen took my silence as confirmation, said at least Mark wasn't afraid to be vulnerable. At least Sarah would have a husband who could give her what I'd never given Ellen: emotional availability, partnership, honesty. She left me sitting there, holding the unsigned papers, the trust documents that would hand over our future to a man whose war stories were faker than a Times Square Rolex. But they didn't want to hear that. They wanted the dream Mark was selling, the noble mission, the chance to matter. I spent that night in the garage, like a cliché, but not working on the Mustang, just sitting, thinking, remembering what my old sergeant used to say about battles. You don't lose them in the field. You lose them before they start, when you let the enemy choose the terrain. Mark had chosen perfectly. He'd turned my family into his army and cast me as the enemy, the bitter old vet who couldn't stand to see others succeed, the emotional cripple who'd rather rebuild carburetors than relationships. The next morning, everything was different. Not obviously different, but different in that way that makes your skin crawl. Ellen and Sarah were in the kitchen, laughing about wedding flowers, acting normal, too normal, like actresses who'd over-rehearsed their scenes. They avoided eye contact with me. Not angry avoided, but guilty avoided. The kind of look you give someone when you know something they don't. When you've already pulled the trigger, but the bullet's still traveling. I made coffee. Black, like always. Ellen commented on the weather. Sarah mentioned a sale at Macy's. Surface talk. Safe talk. The kind of conversation you have with strangers on an elevator. That's when I knew. They'd already done it. While I was sitting in my garage feeling sorry for myself, they'd made their move. The money was gone. Our retirement, our safety net, our future, already transferred to whatever account Mark had set up. But I couldn't prove it. Couldn't ask without starting World War III in my kitchen. So I played along, smiled at the right moments, agreed that yellow roses would be nice for the ceremony, pretended I didn't notice the way Sarah's laugh sounded forced, the way Ellen's hand shook slightly when she poured her coffee. I was an actor in my own life, playing the role of the oblivious father, the damaged vet who didn't understand business or emotion or whatever else they thought I lacked. Let them think I was beaten. Let them think I'd given up. Sun Tzu said every battle is won before it's fought. But he also said to appear weak when you're strong, distant when you're near. They thought I was done. Thought I'd retreat to my garage and my silence and let them have their victory. They were wrong. I'd lost battles before. Lost friends, lost faith, lost pieces of my soul in that jungle. But I'd never lost a war. And this was war now, whether they knew it or not. That afternoon, Mark came by to pick up Sarah for wedding venue shopping. He shook my hand, called me Dad, thanked me for being so understanding. His grip was firm, confident, the grip of a man who thought he'd won. I smiled back, even clapped him on the shoulder, told him to take care of my little girl. Played the defeated father-in-law to perfection. He bought it completely, the arrogant fool. Never suspected that the old dog might still have teeth. After they left, I sat in my own living room feeling like an intruder. The happy family in the photos on the wall belonged to a foreign country. The house was filled with ambush quiet, the kind that makes your neck hair stand up and your hand reach for a weapon that isn't there anymore. Through the wall, I could hear Ellen on the phone, her tone excited, happy. The sound of someone celebrating a victory I was invited to, probably telling her sister about the investment, about Mark's vision, leaving out the part where her husband, the actual veteran, thought it was all garbage. I went to the garage, not to work, just to think. The Mustang sat there, half restored, waiting for attention I couldn't give it. Everything in my life was half restored, half fixed, half finished. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a broken-down relic, good for nothing but taking up space. But then I remembered something from a night patrol in 75. We'd been ambushed, outnumbered 3-1. Should have been dead. But our sergeant, crazy old Thompson, he'd laughed. Actually laughed. Said the enemy had made a classic mistake. They'd left us nowhere to run. And when you got nowhere to run, you've got only one choice. You fight, not because you think you'll win, but because the alternative is lying down and dying. And I'd be damned if I was going to die in my own living room, while my family handed our future to a con artist with a fake Purple Heart. The war had come home, not the one I'd left in Vietnam, but a new one, fought with bank accounts instead of bullets, trust documents instead of artillery. And I was already behind enemy lines, already surrounded, already written off as a casualty. Perfect, just the way I liked it. I sat in that chair in my living room as the sun went down, listening to the ghosts of laughter from the kitchen. My wife and daughter, planning a future built on lies. And me, the lone survivor of a war that hadn't even started yet, at least not officially. But every vet knows, the real war starts long before anyone admits it's happening. It starts with that feeling in your gut, that knowledge that something's wrong, that the enemy is already moving while everyone else is still asleep. Welcome to my war. Population, still one. But now at least I knew what I was fighting for. Not just money or truth, or even revenge. I was fighting for the chance to look my daughter in the eye again without seeing disappointment. Fighting to prove that silence doesn't mean absence, that broken doesn't mean worthless. The enemy thought he'd won, thought he'd turned my family against me, isolated me, defeated me. He was about to learn what every Vietnamese soldier learned the hard way. Never count out a cornered American with nothing left to lose. 3 days after that family meeting, I found the proof, not because I was looking for it. I'd actually been trying to avoid the whole mess, spending time in the garage like the hermit they all thought I was. But there it was on the kitchen table, mixed in with grocery store circulars and credit card offers. A bank envelope addressed to Ellen. She was in the shower. Sarah was at work. The house had that morning quiet that begs you to do something you shouldn't. I picked up the envelope. Already opened. Ellen had probably read it over her morning coffee. Left it there like it was nothing special. Just another piece of mail in our perfect suburban life. Wells Fargo, official letterhead. Confirmation of trust account establishment. Principal trustee, Ellen Mitchell. Initial deposit, $250,000. $250,000. Our entire retirement. Everything I'd saved since coming back from the jungle, swearing I'd never eat government cheese again. I didn't throw anything. Didn't punch the wall. That's movie stuff. Real anger, the dangerous kind, goes cold, crystallizes. I folded the letter carefully, put it back exactly where I found it. Then I went to garage and sat in the Mustang's driver's seat for maybe an hour, not moving, just thinking. There's a moment in every firefight they call the point of no return, when retreat becomes more dangerous than advance. When your only option is to go through the enemy, not around them. They'd crossed that line, taken our money and handed it to a con artist playing dress-up in stolen valor. Time to go to war. But this wasn't Vietnam. Couldn't call in artillery or air support. Had to be smart. Surgical. So I did what any good soldier does when outnumbered and outgunned. I called in favors from people who owed me. Jimmy Fox, O'Connell picked up on the second ring. We'd served together in 75. Saved each other's lives enough times that we stopped keeping score. Now he pushed papers at the Pentagon, had access to every military database from World War I forward. I kept it simple. Told him I needed to verify someone's service record. Mark Peterson, served in Afghanistan, early 2010s. Purple Heart recipient. Jimmy said he'd make some calls, dig around. Old foxholes run deep, and Jimmy still had his ways. 2 days later, he called back. I was in the garage, naturally, pretending to work on the Mustang while actually planning my next move. His voice had that tone you get when delivering bad news to a friend. Billy boy, your guy's a ghost. No Mark Peterson with that service record in Afghanistan. No Purple Heart. No nothing. Either you got the name wrong, or someone's selling you a bridge in Brooklyn. I thanked him, hung up, and stared at the Mustang's engine. First instinct was to march into the house and confront everyone. But that's how you lose wars, acting on emotion instead of intelligence. I needed more. Needed proof so airtight that even Ellen couldn't explain it away. That night, couldn't sleep. Kept replaying every conversation with Mark, looking for something Jimmy could use. Then it hit me around 3 a.m., Mark complaining about the humidity during basic training. Not complaining like a soldier would, with dark humor and creative profanity. Complaining like a suburban kid at summer camp. And he'd mentioned Georgia. Fort Benning. I called Jimmy at dawn. Told him to forget combat units. Check training records. Fort Benning, basic training, 2010 to 2012. Look for washouts, Article 15s. Anything? This time Jimmy found gold. Or maybe fool's gold, depending on how you looked at it. Either way, he found our boy. The email came encrypted, like Jimmy was sending nuclear codes instead of proof that my future son-in-law was a fraud. I opened it on my ancient laptop in the garage, making sure no one could see over my shoulder. Force of habit from a war that ended before Mark was even born. There was in black and white. Official Department of Defense letterhead. Private Mark Peterson. Separated from service after 5 weeks basic training. Reason, Article 121. Theft from fellow soldiers. Additional notes, psychological instability, pathological lying, recommend civilian counseling. 5 weeks. The kid lasted 5 weeks before getting booted for stealing from his bunkmates. Never made it past basic. Never saw Afghanistan, except maybe on CNN. Never earned anything except a bus ticket home and a bad conduct discharge. I printed 3 copies. Hid 2, kept one in my wallet. Sat there in my garage feeling something I hadn't felt since Vietnam. That cold clarity you get right before an assault, when fear turns into focus and everything else falls away. He hadn't just stolen our money. He'd stolen honor from every real soldier who'd bled for those medals he claimed. Every kid who came home in a box draped with flag. Every veteran fighting their own ghosts without making a Broadway production out of it. The engagement party was in 3 days. Ellen had invited half the neighborhood. Sarah's college friends, her book club, the works. Perfect audience for what I had planned, but I needed backup. Real soldiers to stand witness when I exposed a stolen valor piece of garbage. First call was to the hardest man I knew, Sergeant Phillips. Found his name in Mark's discharge papers as a senior drill instructor. Took some digging. But veterans have ways of finding each other. Like moths to flame, or maybe more like survivors finding fellow survivors. Phillips was retired, living outside Columbus. Still sounded like he could make a recruit cry just by clearing his throat. I explained the situation. His response was immediate. I'll be there. Nobody wears our uniform as a costume on my watch. Second call was to Tom Kowalski, a real Afghanistan vet from my VA support group. Lost his left leg to an IED outside Kabul. 26 years old, more medals than a North Korean general, and actually earned every one. Asked him if he wanted to meet someone pretending to be him. His laugh was dark. Wouldn't miss it for the world, brother. The day of the party came fast. October Saturday, one of those perfect fall days that made suburban life look like a magazine spread. Ellen had strung lights across the backyard, set up tables with white cloths, even hired a bartender. She'd spent our money, what was left of it, to celebrate the man who'd stolen the rest. I played my part, helped set up chairs, carried ice, smiled when neighbors arrived, even shook Mark's hand when he showed up in a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly VA check. He called me Dad. I called him son, both of us lying through our teeth. The party hit full swing around 7 p.m. Mark was holding court near the bar, telling another war story. This one involved a sniper, a dust storm, and heroics that would have made Audie Murphy roll his eyes. Sarah hung on his arm like he was made of gold. Ellen glowed with pride. Everyone laughing, drinking, celebrating the American dream. Then Mark stood up, tapped his beer bottle for attention. Time for the toast. The golden boy wanted to thank everyone for welcoming him into the family. He went on about love, commitment, sacrifice. Used the word honor 3 times. When he thanked me specifically for my support, my trust, for being the father he'd never had, I almost laughed, but I kept it together. Raised my beer, waited for the applause to die down, then stood up myself. Mark, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Since we're family now, I invited some special guests. People who know you better than I ever could. The back door opened. Phillips came out first, all 6'4" him, still moving like a drill sergeant even in civilian clothes. Tom rolled out behind him in his wheelchair, wearing his dress uniform with a silver star, purple heart, and bronze star catching the light. The backyard went silent. Not quiet, silent. Like someone had hit mute on reality. Mark's face did this thing where it tried to smile and panic at the same time. His beer bottle shook just enough to notice. Sarah looked confused. Ellen looked worried. The neighbors looked fascinated, like they'd accidentally wandered into dinner theater. I walked over to Mark, slow and easy. No hurry. Had him dead to rights, and we both knew it. Mark, I said, conversational as discussing the weather. You said you served. These men served too. Thought you might know each other. Phillips stepped forward. Didn't even look at Mark. Addressed the crowd like he was briefing troops. This individual was separated from my training unit after 5 weeks for theft. He never completed basic training. Never served in Afghanistan. Never earned any medals. I pulled the folded discharge papers from my pocket, placed them on the table in front of Mark. Didn't say another word. Didn't need to. The silence exploded. Someone dropped a wine glass. Shattered on the patio like a grenade. Sarah's face went from confused to horrified to something beyond words. She let go of Mark's arm like it burned. Ellen stood frozen, her hand over her mouth, eyes wide with the realization of what she'd done. Mark tried to talk. Started stammering about misunderstandings, explanations, how it wasn't what it looked like. But Phillips cut him off with a look that could have stopped a charging rhino. Tom just sat there in his wheelchair, the real hero, let his presence say everything that needed saying. The neighbors started leaving. Quiet goodbyes, embarrassed shuffles to the gate. The party died in minutes. Just family and the truth left standing in the wreckage. Someone, think it was Ellen's sister, must have called the cops. 2 officers showed up, took statements, led Mark away in handcuffs. Fraud, theft, stolen valor. Turns out pretending to be a veteran for financial gain is actually illegal. Who knew? Sarah ran inside crying. Ellen followed her. I stood in my backyard with Phillips and Tom, 3 veterans among the abandoned beer bottles and party lights. Not saying much. Sometimes silence says it better than words ever could. That was 6 weeks ago. The lawyers are handling the money stuff. Might get some back, Might not. Don't really care anymore. You can replace money. Can't replace trust, but then again, maybe it needed breaking. Maybe we all needed to see what we've been willing to believe versus what was actually true. Sarah came to see me last week. First time since the party. Found me in the garage, working on the Mustang. She stood there for a while, not saying anything, then sat down on the milk crate I use as a chair. We sat in silence for maybe 20 minutes. Good silence, though, the kind that heals instead of hurts. Finally, she spoke. Quiet voice, almost a whisper. Said Mark had told her everything. His rough childhood, his dreams, his plans for the future. Said she thought someone was finally being real with her, finally opening up the way I never could. I kept working on the engine, choosing my words careful like. Told her the best liars always tell the truth about everything except what matters most. They give you their pain, their dreams, their fears, everything but the facts. She leaned against me then, first time since she was maybe 12. I put my arm around her, oil-stained hands and all. We sat there as the sun went down, not talking about the money or the lies or the humiliation. Just a father and daughter in a garage, surrounded by half-fixed things and the possibility of repair. Ellen's coming around, too. Slowly. We don't talk about that night in the kitchen, when she said, I was probably just a clerk. Some wounds take time. Some never heal completely. But we're trying, which is more than we've done in 20 years. Phillips called last week. Said if I ever needed anything, just ask. Tom invited me to the Real Veterans Support Group, the one that doesn't advertise, doesn't judge, just exists for guys like us who brought the war home in ways nobody wants to discuss. They say you can't go home again, but that's not true. You can't go back to the home you left, but you can build something new on the ruins. Maybe even something better, something more honest. Last night, I was working late in the garage when Sarah brought me coffee. Black, no sugar, just like I taught her. She sat on that milk crate and asked me something she'd never asked before. Asked me about Vietnam. Not the hero stuff, not the stories Mark would have told. Asked me about the real thing. I told her about the fear, about Henderson, about the village we don't mention, about coming home to a country that didn't want to hear any of it. Told her why I chose silence over stories, why I rebuilt engines instead of relationships. She listened, really listened, then said something that knocked me sideways. Said maybe Mark's lies had done one good thing. They'd shown her the difference between performing pain and carrying it, between talking about honor and living it. We stayed up until dawn, father and daughter, finally having the conversation we should have had years ago. No audience, no performance, just truth. Ugly, complicated, necessary truth. The Mustang's almost done now. Few more weeks and she'll purr like new. Sarah's been helping, learning about engines and restoration. It's become our thing. Fixing something broken, making it run again. Good metaphor. If you're into that sort of thing, they say there are no winners in war, only survivors. Maybe that's true at home, too. We lost our savings, our illusions, our perfect family story. But sitting in this garage, teaching my daughter about carburetors while she teaches me about forgiveness, I think we might have won something better. We won the truth, and each other, and in the end, that's the only victory that counts. Welcome home.